Hey guys, it's the WalterFootball.com After Dark Show for October 25, 2024. We're going to be doing our Week 8 NFL picks, Thursday thoughts, as usual on Thursday. Before we intro our co-host for tonight, please hit like, subscribe, comment below, share this video, visit the link in the description for the merch store. As you can see on the screen, you have a bunch of t-shirts here, one of which I am wearing. It's the same one from yesterday. Only 2 days in a row I've been wearing this shirt, so it's not the 3 days in a row that we had last week. So we're not in terrible shape. We have a bunch of t-shirts here, including our new Slava NFL t-shirt here at the bottom, which we discussed yesterday. But we have a bunch of shirts here. Any of that would help. We have a 20% off sale too. So definitely take advantage of that if you want one of these shirts. Also, please consider super chat, super stickers. We had a great super chat yesterday from John Sanders. Also, Slew recently. Germ, Can't Make an Eagle, Andrew Z, Degeneron, Kevin Kovac in the past. And of course, Cassandra in the past as well. So that's the best way to support the show because YouTube ads pay nothing. I say that all the time. It's like less than $1 per video. So anytime we get like even a $3 super chat, it's like 3 times what we usually make on here. So I can't really say enough. Like it really helps out so much. Also, you can go to Amazon, buy my books. My third book that I recently released, Jerks to the College Years, where I made fun of people at Penn State. I spent 6 years there. So you can imagine I had a ton of writing material here. Also, How the 2020 MVP Was Stolen, which is my second book. And my first book, Safety and Field Goal, is on Amazon as well. So we are joined tonight by Andy Iskoe. Andy, how are you? And how was your week 7?
I'm fine, Walter. I hope you are as well. And my week 7 was pretty decent, all things considered. I would have preferred if LaFleur went for the 2-point conversion instead of the extra point when it was 20-19. There wasn't that much. I think there were only a couple more field goals. I can understand taking the points, but this was. It looked like it was going to be a game that was going to fall right around the total, end up coming a few points short. But I just never understand why coaches. I don't mind when a coach goes for 2, like Tomlin used to do when he would score the first touchdown of the game, get 6, and he'd go for 2 and either be 6-0 or 8-0. But when the game is underway and you already have a feel for how the other team is playing, and you could see that. Green Bay was not going to have the kind of game that they'd had a couple of weeks prior to that, where they were just being able to do things at will, that they decided in that situation not to at least be up by 3. And it ended up not costing them the game, but it cost me the cover in that one. That line was a 2.5. But that's really about the only thing I can complain about. Otherwise, it was, well, I could complain about one more thing. I had the over in the Carolina-Washington game, and of course it was 40-7. Daniels got injured early, and to be fair, Mariota played a very good game in relief, especially coming in relatively cold for that. But a couple of field goals, I think that had Daniels been in there, they might have been able to convert into touchdowns. But that's really not the reason why the game didn't go over as much as it is Carolina's total ineptitude. Another 30-point loss for them this season. So that was a disappointment. But other than that, there were a lot of good plays last week that came through both in the colleges and the pros. But as I say, that's a history, and now we attack the mystery of what will be week 8.
Yeah, well, I complained about this on Tuesday. I managed to bet heavily on every single quarterback who got injured in week 7. I had the Dolphins. We had Tyler Huntley get injured, and Tim Boyle came in. I don't know how Boyle's still in the NFL at this rate.
How about Dalton?
Yeah, I had Dalton. You mean well?
He got knocked out late, didn't he?
Oh, late, yeah. But okay, so I'll get to that in a second. So I also had I had Aiden O'Connell. Minshew came in. I thought lateral move, but every single point the Rams scored came off of Minshew turnovers. I had Cleveland. I had Deshaun Watson, who was having a decent game, 12 of 15. He got injured, and then Dorian Thompson-Robinson couldn't complete half of his passes. He was abysmal. And then you might be thinking, wait, did you have Washington? Because I didn't see them in the card. So I did not bet Jane Daniels, but I had him as my quarterback in my DraftKings $100.
Yeah, I did have Washington. I did have Washington as a play against Carolina, but it was partially based on Carolina.
Yeah, that was as soon as he went out. I think it was like apparent suddenly that Marcus Mariota, there's not much of a difference because Carolina's defense could be historically bad.
Well, not only that, but Mariota's an experienced quarterback, and he's 30 years old, but he doesn't have the body of a 30 years old because he's missed so many games over the years, whether it be due to injury or being in the backup role, and he was quite efficient. Now we'll see what happens this week if he starts up against the Bears. And it looks like the line suggests, in fact, the line move suggests that he will, because Washington, we can get to this one a little bit later, but Washington was a 2.5-point advanced favorite. They took the game off the board as they normally do when Sunday's action gets underway. And of course, Daniels was injured early in that game. I think it was the first drive or second drive, whatever it was. So by the time they reposted the line, Washington was still put in as a 1-point favorite, and that was with the expectation that it was iffy whether or not Daniels would be able to play this week. But the bettors quickly took the position that most likely he wouldn't, and they bet Chicago up to a 2.5-point favorite. And I think a lot of that had to do with, Daniels is injured, but they didn't really consider if there was a drop-off, how much of a drop-off there would be from a rookie, still a rookie, a very good rookie, but a rookie, to a veteran who played capably in his place where he had no expectations of being put into the game other than if there were an injury. But that may have been a bit of an overreaction. I thought maybe if you wanted to make something different, maybe you make the game a pick'em.
Yeah, makes sense. I know he threw 2 passes. I knew that well because I was staring at it on my DraftKings screen. It didn't and
it kept saying 2. Yeah.
Yep. And it was a good lineup. I had Saquon Barkley. Heading into the 4 o'clock slate, I had Jane Daniels. I had Terry McLaurin. I had some other players still left. I was like, oh man, this is going to be a good result, and I ended up not cashing because he got hurt. But anyway,
by the way, I wonder if I have not seen it, but somebody may have written about it. I wonder how often it's been that a player, in this case Saquon Barkley, rushed for more yards than the other team gained in total yards, as was the case last week against the Giants.
That was truly remarkable.
And then when you break it down into a further subset, how many guys have done that against a former team?
Yeah, well, he had the most rushing yards ever against the former team.
Yeah.
So that was a great performance by him, and the Giants took 8 sacks. So only natural that that he outgained the Giants pretty.
I had a friend at that friend and his family at that game. There were a total of 13 sacks altogether. The first 7 possessions in the game resulted in punts. I was texting back and forth with him during the game, and I asked him. I said, "Did you leave early?" I said, and he replied, "Yeah, we left about 2 minutes before the end of the game." I said, "Oh, so you left 20 minutes after the Giants?"
Yeah, it's a good call. That was a truly horrific performance by the Giants.
If I appear bitter, it's not because I had no financial interest in the game. So just thought I'd use the line.
Yeah, I didn't either. I just it was just a pretty anemic football for a while. A couple comments before we begin. McVay is a jerk, John says, who had the under on Kupp's yards by activating Nacua out of nowhere. Yeah, we actually talked about that with Andy before we started recording. We had Puka Nacua, so we had Cooper Kupp over receiving yards, and that was before the Nacua news. And actually, even Mike LaFleur said ahead of the game, he said Nacua is just going to block. So I think we can never trust Mike LaFleur ever again. Not that he may be in position to be trusted, but
wasn't that said about when who was it? Jamar Chase was in his first game back that he wasn't going to be used very much. He caught a few passes in that one, and I think Higgins as well. A lot of coaches say that it's kind of like it's quite possible that the Commanders have known. I don't know if it's the case, but that they have known that Daniels probably won't play. But they haven't listed him other than week to week or whatever. And by a certain extent, that makes sense because it means that now the other team, in addition to preparing for Daniels, has to prepare for Mariota. It's kind of like with what we talked about it, I think, one of the last week or the week before, with Pittsburgh, with Wilson and Fields, is that if Tomlin, and I think he might be doing it, is preparing to use both quarterbacks. I thought he said he would use Fields last week. I don't think he got in the game at all. But in any event, if you have to prepare for, let's say, 2 capable quarterbacks like Fields and Wilson, it means you're spending 50% of the time that you would normally spend on preparing for who you almost certainly expect would be a starter, which is true for most teams. So that means if you can only prepare 50% instead of 100%, that gives the other team an advantage, whether or not they use the second quarterback.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's why not? I
It's
mean,
gamesmanship.
they have no reason to speak the truth.
Yeah.
Now, some coaches are more truthful than others. Some are huge liars. So, it's I don't know. You have to kind of
And some are Bill Belichick with no comment.
right, exactly.
Essentially, no comment.
Right. Yeah, you can't lie if you don't say anything.
Yeah.
So we had Matthias said the refs need to be stopped. So I don't know if you saw the game at the end where Darnold was sacked and he had the face mask pulled. It was a horrible call, horrible non-call. But I didn't think the Vikings really had a chance with Darrisaw out. As soon as they lost Darrisaw, they couldn't do anything offensively. Scored 6 points after that against the Rams defense. It's not that good. So if Darrisaw's out for a while,
I did not see the end of that game. I was watching the Pittsburgh game where I believe McCord, the Syracuse quarterback. Now you'll see in the box score that he was 23, I think, for 53. He was actually 28 for 53 because 5 of the passes went to Pittsburgh defenders, which may explain why Ohio State did not decide to go with him this year after last year. And he ended up transferring. And Howard, who's in there, well, you can't argue against a team that is one loss to the number 1 team in the country, and they still put up 31 points in the game.
Yeah, that's I can definitely see why. So let's at the end of that Minnesota Rams game, they sacked Arnold in the end zone for a safety. That's why it was 30-20. But there was an obvious face mask that was uncalled. Like I said, I don't think the Vikings would have won anyway because they didn't have Darrisaw and they weren't moving the ball, but. I don't know. It's gonna be, like I said, it's gonna be rough for the Vikings if Darrisaw's out for a while. He couldn't put pressure on his leg when they helped him off, so it looked pretty bad. But I guess you never know.
Well, we've talked about it before, and the NFL was opposed to gambling for years and years and years, and now they're partners in making money off of it. But they always still bring up the concern about integrity. And who do you fix a football game with? You don't fix it with the players. You fix it with the officials. The officials are the lowest paid ones on the field. Where I'm headed with this, as we said it before, every play, including penalties and non-penalties, should be challengeable because you have the technology to go back and take a look. I certainly can understand if they say, well, if they didn't call it, even though they should have, maybe that's not reviewable. But if they've called a penalty, this game is so fast and it gets faster and faster every year, and the officials get older every year, that they can't necessarily keep pace, and they make a split-second decision. And what's especially egregious is when a play is over and about 4 seconds later, you see a flag come in, meaning that the official said, did I see a penalty or not? I'm not really sure. Well, if they throw the flag, at least if it's challengeable, he can be either proven correct or incorrect. But the fact that it takes so long is also not something that's good for the game.
No, it's not. It's I think that's something they need to fix. And having the officials go full time, maybe that's a way, because then they're paid more. And if they make mistakes, they could be fired and lose their jobs.
I think the problem, though, is the timing. These athletes are just so fast that you can't even simulate it in practice because the players are not going full speed in practice. If you had officials like working let's say they're working full time with their team, the teams they're going to be officiating. You have half the crew, for example, this week down in Arizona, looking at the Cardinals, getting familiar with them, and then you have the other half of the crew down in Miami. Taking a look and being familiar with what the Dolphins are going to do. But you still can't do it if the players are going, maybe half speed, maybe 3/4 speed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do agree that all calls should be challengeable. But let's get into the games. So our first one on Sunday is Titans at the Lions. So a couple injury notes here. Calvin Ridley was DNP in practice twice. L'Jarius Sneed was also DNP in practice twice. So the Titans could continue to have cluster injuries at cornerback because Jadobe Awuzie is already out. So Sneed might be out as well. Not that Sneed's been playing well because he's been banged up. Ridley being out would essentially be cluster injuries at receiver as well because the Titans traded Hopkins. So they would be down their top 2 receivers and top 2 cornerbacks. And this is something that I brought up to you before we started recording. I looked at the bottom 5 teams in my power rankings and how I would do if I faded them each week, excluding week 1, because we don't really know who the worst teams are going to be then. Had I faded the bottom 5 teams in my power rankings, I'd be 15-6-3 against the spread this year. And I look back last year, I'd be 35-28 for a healthy 55.6%.
That would be what, through the same number of weeks, same number of games, or was that over a full season?
Full season last year, excluding week 1. So yeah, I fading the Titans who've lived in the bottom 5 since like week 3. I think that's a good move here. The only concern I have is that the Lions have they're coming off the win against Minnesota at the last second.
Terrible situation for them.
Yeah, and next week they have Green Bay. However, I just think they're so much better than Tennessee. I think that it'll be fine. Like last week, for example, Buffalo's coming off a short week win against the Jets. Same opponent here. They were favored by what was the spread last week? Like 9.5 or 10. And they
about
they,
9.5, yeah.
Yeah, they won 34-10.
And they were down 10-0, if I recall, in that game.
Exactly. And the Titans had Ridley and they had Hopkins in that game, and they may not have either in this one. So I'm even though it's a bad spot for the Lions, I'm gonna be on the Lions for a few units. Who do you like in this game?
I probably have to pass because I did want to take Tennessee. You had Detroit coming off their bye. They got that tremendous win, 47-9 in Dallas, and then last week they played that game where they had to come from behind and end up getting the winning field goal at the end of the game to defeat unbeaten Minnesota, tie them for the division lead, and actually now they're a half game ahead because of Minnesota's loss tonight. So it was a perfect situation, and you're getting a generous amount of points with a Tennessee team that is really awful, but you have to wonder what Detroit's mindset would have been, again, considering that, okay, we've got Tennessee, should be an easy game. We got Green Bay up next, okay, another one of our division rivals. And, really, when you look at the NFC North, what are they now? I think 19-6 overall, but that includes 2 divisional games. So they're 17-4 against the rest of the NFL outside of their own division. That's very impressive. Now, we don't know if Minnesota, and you mentioned the injury and other factors, if Minnesota will be able to maintain that level of play, but I see no reason right now, barring significant injuries, why certainly their other 2 division foes, Green Bay and Chicago, won't be able to continue playing solid football. But when Tennessee trades Hopkins, it's basically saying to the team, even though they knew they weren't going to do much this year, or at least based upon the way the season started, hey, we're throwing in the towel. We're raising the white flag. The players cannot feel too good about that, and you're going to start seeing players playing for contract incentives to meet those, and winning will be sort of secondary or accidental if it occurs. So as a result, I'm almost certain I won't play Tennessee because of that factor. But I still don't want to lay the line with Detroit, only because even if it's a flawed game that Detroit plays, you're talking 11.5 points. It'll probably go up even a little bit further. I think I saw some 12s out there today. They can still win that game, 27-17, and Tennessee can cover, and Detroit's satisfied to get the win. So yeah. I just can't lay that big number in this situation because it is a bad situation. If the situation were reversed and Detroit was, say, coming off back-to-back losses, this would be the perfect opponent.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would. This would be one of my top plays of the week if the Lions were in a better situation. I just think that they're just so much better than Tennessee. And Tennessee seems like a dead team to me, so I'm still okay betting them, but not as one of my top
not in
plays.
this spot. Yeah.
All right. Next game is we have the Ravens at the Browns. Ravens are favored by 9. I've seen some 8.5s. So this was at 10. It fell to 9, then 8.5. Yeah, it fell because of the Jameis Winston news when we got word that Jameis Winston was going to start instead of Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I said on Tuesday, if this were Thompson-Robinson, I would not be on the Browns at all. I think I'd be on the Ravens. But Winston actually gives the Browns a good chance at backdoor cover. We saw it last week when he drew to within 7 of the Bengals, who, by the way, went to overtime with Baltimore. So those teams you could maybe argue are pretty close. Granted, it was in Cincinnati, but still, Baltimore's defense is pretty bad. So I think they're going to be live for a backdoor cover. For the Ravens, no Zay Flowers so far in practice, DNP twice. No Marlon Humphrey in practice, DNP twice. For Cleveland, Jedrick Wills missed practice twice, but Wyatt Teller might come back. So kind of a wash there if Wills ends up missing the game. Having Teller back would be huge. So I like the Browns here. I think that they could get a lot of yardage over the middle of the field against the Ravens, who've given up so much yardage to tight ends. David Njoku, I think, should have a great game. And the Ravens coming off a short week, win on national TV. I think this is a bad spot for them, and this is the Browns Super Bowl. Really, I mean, they have nothing else to play for. They'd love to beat the Ravens, one of their biggest rivals. So I like Cleveland here. Who do you like here?
Probably can't play the game because I was also looking towards Cleveland. In fact, the advanced line for this game that came out last Tuesday, not 2 days ago, but last Tuesday, had the Ravens a 9.5 point favorite before both teams played their games last week. When the line came back up after Sunday's games, before Monday's games, they put Baltimore up as a 10.5 point favorite. And of course, by that time, they knew that Watson was out for the year and that Winston would likely start. The concern I have here, even though I do like the Browns in the game, I'm not going to play it because Winston, we don't know. He's had over his career many years interception issues. Going up against the Cleveland defense may be a little bit. Going up against a Baltimore defense may not be as much of a problem this year. The problem I have, and we've talked about it, it's actually a negative for Baltimore, but in this case, it's a negative for Cleveland because they like to run the ball, and I'm sure they want to give a little bit more opportunities to Chubb after he got the rust off last week. The offensive line improving, getting healthier. Baltimore is allowing something like 59 yards per game on the ground, so that's very difficult. If they force Cleveland to abandon the running game, I'm not so much how sure I am that Cleveland will have a great deal of success against the Baltimore defense. And again, I mentioned that they're like number 1 against the rush and number 31 against the pass, but that's because teams have learned that they're not going to be able to run against them, so they're forced to pass. So it's a little bit misleading when they are giving up something like 276 yards per game, which ranks like number 31, because teams are passing more against them. I mean, if you measure, I don't have it in front of me, but I would imagine if you take a look at which team's defense has faced the most pass attempts this year, I would not be surprised if it's Baltimore, or certainly in the top 5. So that would explain the bad primary numbers. The secondary numbers are a little bit more important as far as I keep stressing, when they complete passes, what's the average pass completion go for? So that may be some issues for Cleveland. A lot of people were on Cleveland last week, and it was 21-6, and they came back and they had a chance. But I think the love for Cleveland may have been a week too early. I can see it a little bit more justified this week because I also think the fact that Watson's out gives the team some stability where the players might be wondering, we had the offensive line issues, etc., but why aren't we giving Winston more of a chance? Okay, well, now they're giving him the chance, and Winston doesn't really have to be looking over his shoulder. And, of course, there's no Watson to return this year. So I think it's almost like we see with a lot of other situations where once a player issue is resolved, often the negativity surrounding that goes away. We didn't really see it with the Devontae Adams acquisition last week with either of the Raiders, although they played respectable in that loss to the Rams. We didn't really see it with the Jets, but that wasn't so much an issue on Adams. He only got 3 catches in the first half and none in the second half. That's more a Jets issue. So I can certainly see, and you do bring up the good point, the former Cleveland Browns, now the Baltimore Ravens, they're all 4 teams have strong rivalries with the other 3, but this one may be a little bit more intense. So I could see taking the points. If it goes back up to 10, I might consider a play, but there are other games I like a little bit more with a little bit less, let's call it wishful thinking that might be involved here.
Okay. I think Winston definitely an upgrade over Watson, given how bad Watson has been. I brought up the stats, I think, to Evan. So through I don't know if last game counts, but through the first 6 weeks of the season, Deshaun Watson had the second worst EPA for any quarterback in Cleveland Browns history. Do you want to guess who through 6 games? Do you want to guess who the worst quarterback EPA was?
Baker Mayfield.
No, it was also Deshaun Watson.
Deshaun. Okay, yes, that's right. Yeah, okay. So, I didn't think it was Baker. It was the first one I could think of because I knew it wasn't Frank Ryan, and I also knew it wasn't Bernie Kosar.
Yeah. So the 2 worst start of the seasons for Watson for the Browns has been Deshaun Watson. So I
wonder how his performance last week, which was decent, affected those numbers.
Yeah, it was not even a full half though, so I don't know how much it would have moved the needle, but it was better. albeit against the bad defense.
If I recall correctly, also, I think Cleveland is right at the bottom or very near the bottom in that yards per pass completion. They don't have a lot of big plays, or they haven't had a lot of big plays, and they're completing a lot of short passes. I want to say it's about 9 yards per completion. I'll see if I can check that now.
So Cleveland right now, in terms of EPA, as pass offense, they are 5th worst in the NFL. The 4 teams worse than them, the Patriots are the 4th worst, Panthers 3rd worst, Broncos 2nd worst, and the Raiders are dead last. So yeah, they've been pretty bad. Also, I think that I don't know if this is I really, this is just speculation, but I can't imagine that Deshaun Watson was liked by many of the teammates. I'm sure he had some friends in the locker room, but overall, he probably had a lot of people who didn't like him. And so and Winston seems to be much more liked. He seems to be like a more personable guy. So I think that the team might play harder for Winston too. I don't know.
Winston apparently is he's apparently a very good inspirational speaker in the locker room, is always coming out with that. He's a very smart guy. I don't know if people recall, he got accepted at Stanford and chose to go to Florida State to play football.
With Winston, something that stood out to me when the Browns played the Raiders, there was a play where Watson was yelling at the offensive line or something, and Winston stepped in and kind of yelled at Watson to stop yelling at the offensive line. And Watson went over to the offensive line and apologized to them.
Yeah.
So
kind of makes sense.
Yeah, he's well liked, and so like I said, I think speculation, but I think they could play harder for him. So
yeah, they'll hold their blocks a little bit longer than they might. Well, first of all, they'll pretty much have to because of mobility, but also that those intangibles. So we might see a much more sustained effort by the blockers.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the next game. So we have Packers at the Jaguars. I have to apologize for this one because on Tuesday I talked about how much I like the Packers, given that the Jaguars coming off an international win seemed like a huge deal for them, and I just completely forgot. And Evan brought this up that the Packers have the Lions next. I don't know how I missed that because I talked about the Lions having the Packers next. Just completely, just whatever in my head. So I don't like the Packers as much. There's sharp money coming on Jacksonville, driving this line down from 4.5 to 4. So this is a pass for me right now. I feel like this is just a bad situation for both teams. Do you have a good feel for this game?
I do like Green Bay in this game for a number of reasons. It's Jacksonville's defense they're playing against. Jacksonville just played 2 games in London. Yeah, they got back home earlier in the week. I think it was either late Sunday. Well, it would have been probably Monday. But they had to regroup with the family and everything and the kids and all that. So it could have been a little bit of a distraction that takes away from the preparation time. And I can't take too much from their win against New England because it was New England. I mean, my gosh, the Jets beat them by 21 earlier this year. Houston beat them by 20 up there in their home field, etc. As far as Green Bay, look, they played a Houston team that was a double-digit win team last year. They still have a very good defense. Does Houston? Love did not have a great game against them. But I think if I recall, weren't they like -3 in turnovers? I think 2 interceptions and a fumble, if I recall. I'm not quite positive on that, but I do believe that was one of the issues. But they still they didn't have a great running game last week, which I think will be a little bit different against Jacksonville. So I have Green Bay's on. I think sometimes. And we're all guilty. I know I certainly am of talking about the look ahead. I honestly don't think the look ahead occurs while the guys are playing football. Maybe during the week, the coaches are putting in some plays for the opponent the following week, but that's not affecting the players. They're looking to play the game. And if these two teams play their typical game, Green Bay's 10 points better.
I agree. I think if you were to tell me, the Packers will not look ahead to the Lions, I would bet them pretty heavily. I just worry about that, but you could be right. Maybe they won't do it. But yeah, it was a tough fight.
Well, the other thing is, it was a tough win against Houston. If they were coming off, like Buffalo, coming off a 34-10 win, and they had their biggest rival on deck, or one of their biggest rivals on deck, maybe they might take it a little bit, lightly. But the fact that they're coming off a dull effort that they were fortunate enough to win, albeit against a team that's much better than Jacksonville. I think we do get a better focus there. The coach can point to a lot of mistakes that they made last week. And they can't say, hey, you better be sharp here, because if you make the mistakes you made last week, you're not going to be in a good shape against our next opponent.
Yeah. So Drew bringing up, yes, there were -3 turnovers. The Texans got 10 free points to enter to open the game. The Texans only had 197 yards of offense in that game. Green Bay's defense is really good, especially against the pass. So not as good against the run, but still, I still like them to cover. I just don't know if I'm going to bet them because of the look ahead, but you guys might be able to talk me into it. Let's see.
You're considering betting Detroit at a much bigger number, despite the look ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, Jacksonville's better than Tennessee. I think like that's the difference. Like Jacksonville they have some talent. Like, I feel like they can be competitive. Like they almost beat Houston, for example, it's 24-20. I know they've had some ugly results, for example, against Buffalo.
And they're both, and of course the difference is Detroit's playing at home and Green Bay is on the road. So that's also, it is a factor, but you're still asking there are many talented teams that don't play up to their talent level, and Jacksonville has done that all year, and Jacksonville has been a bettor's favorite team. They keep betting Jacksonville week after week after week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the Sharps love the Jaguars. They've taken them every week. They've gotten.
What was the team last year? Was it Cleveland last year? What was the team last year that they kept betting every week? It may not have been Cleveland because of the quarterbacks.
No, it wasn't.
There was one team that they kept betting, and maybe it was 2 years ago they bet Cleveland, I think. Maybe it was not last year.
I remember they used to, a couple of years ago, like they were all over the Eagles, not the Super Bowl year, but like I think the year before.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I know you're talking about. They kept taking the team. Maybe it was Carolina. Maybe they kept taking Carolina last year.
That was this year.
That was this year?
Carolina. They were betting Carolina from the start.
Okay. Oh, Broncos. Slu's sharp memory there. Broncos. They were betting the
Broncos.
Yes,
okay, yeah.
Even when you were on the show last year, I asked you why you thought the Sharps were betting the Broncos nonstop. So, I should remember that. Okay, thanks, Lou, for pointing that out.
Yeah, appreciate it. Broncos were actually 8-9 last year. So I mean, and they were actually they were 6-10-1 against the spread. So that's part of the reason why the public did not do well consistently betting on a team. It's kind of like eventually they're going to cover and say, "See, I told you they were going to cover." You told us that for 6 weeks. It's about time you got one right. It's sometimes you don't want to overreact to what you see last, but you also don't want to be stubborn and keep insisting that you're right, despite the fact that every week you're wrong. It turns out that way. At some point, you have to realize maybe I just made a mistake in my evaluation of this team. Now, often the way that works is when you make that mistake, they finally cover the following week. But the point is you do have to have some sort of flexibility as far as being able to say, hey, maybe I've misjudged this team. I did that, for example, with Atlanta. I was not all that sold on Atlanta coming into the season, yet I had to be impressed the way that they played early in the year. And some of the losses they had, they lost to Pittsburgh on opening day. I think was that the 6th field goal game, I think, for Pittsburgh, 18-0. But Pittsburgh turned out to be a better team than a lot of people thought, or at least they're winning games. Indianapolis, I'll get to Indianapolis when we talk about that game. That sometimes you just have to say, hey, the numbers do not, or the results do not justify the numbers, or the other way around.
That's what the Martingale strategy just they have to cover eventually.
No.
But it doesn't always work. You're right. Chris saying Jacksonville is terrible and no reason to show up. Packers win easily. I would say Tennessee is terrible. I think Jacksonville is bad. I don't think Jacksonville is terrible. Like they have some good things going for them. They have the receivers. Evan Ingram being back is helpful. Tank Bigsby looks like a real running back. They have a pass rush. Tyson Campbell being back, they have like a real cornerback. The only concern I have about going against Jacksonville here is maybe, and even though it was against New England last week, maybe that kind of win gives them a little bit confidence to say, hey, there's still more than half a season to go. We can play. Forget the fact it's an NFL team. Okay, they still beat them on a neutral site. That maybe they can do that, because if you remember the game that they did win, I think that was that the Indianapolis game.
who they beat a few weeks ago,
Yeah,
that they had to
again
come
by
from
3.
behind after they blew.
Mhm.
I think they blew a lead and they came back to win that one after having blown a lot of fourth quarter leads that ended up costing them the game, beginning with Miami. So maybe they do get a little bit of let's go energy after last week's win. I still would be looking to play Green Bay, but it's not one of my better plays of the week. But it's certainly in the column of potential, possible, likely plays.
Question about ETN coming back this week. He was limited in practice twice, so anyone's guess. I assume he's going to be questionable. So 50-50 to play. I would guess he's going to sit out 1 week and then come back after that. But I think that's a negative if he comes back. I think he's worse than Tank Bigsby, and if he's available, that means that Doug Peterson is going to run with him. So yeah, it's actually it's a subtraction by addition, I guess you could say. So anyway, let's move on to the next game. We have the Colts. You brought them up, so I'm kind of curious what you have to say about them. Colts at the Texans. This line was 6.5, it's down to 5. So sharp money coming in on Indianapolis. Jonathan Taylor. Maybe this is why Jonathan Taylor full practice today. Yep. So it looks like he's going to be back this week. So major bump here for the Colts. I love the Colts this week. Houston has a terrible look ahead situation. Talk about look aheads. They have to play a Thursday night, and this has been just a deadly look ahead for these big favorites. Yeah,
but it's almost a bye considering their opponent on that Thursday night on the road.
The Jets.
Yeah.
So we've had some dubious look aheads. Seattle, for example, looking at San Francisco, they lost to the Giants outright. San Francisco also looking ahead to that game. They lost to Arizona outright last week. The Rams almost there was 20-15 against the Raiders. Looking ahead to this game tonight. So I think the Texans could be looking ahead. And the Colts, they played a great game against Houston week 1. Richardson has had his best game of the year against the Texans in week 1. The Texans struggle against mobile quarterbacks. So this is dating back to last year. And Houston, their offensive line has not been the same this year. It brought up how they only had 197 net yards of offense against the Packers. It just seems like without Nico Collins, they're just not moving the ball nearly as well. So I like the Colts quite a bit here, especially with Jonathan Taylor coming back. I think they could win outright. So I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this game.
I'm with you on that one. In fact, I took what was it? I think 6. I think I took 6 with the Colts earlier in the week. I was going to mention something here about these two teams. If you take a look at Houston this year, they are 5-2, 3-4 against the spread. Only 2 of their games have been lopsided, the 34-7 loss at Minnesota and the 41-21 win at New England. Otherwise, here are their results. Win by 2, win by 6, win by 4, win by 3, lose by 2. Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds impressive. Well, listen to the Colts. Lose by 2, lose by 6, win by 5, win by 3, lose by 3, win by 3, win by 6. Indianapolis just has a way of hanging around, which explains why, they're 4-3, but they're 6-1 against the spread. And if you take a look at how competitive these games were expected to play, Indy, 3-point dog, 2-point favorite, 2-point favorite, 2.5-point dog, 3.5-point dog, 2.5-point dog, 3-point favorite. So it's not like they're covering against, getting plus 6.5. Or obviously not blowing out teams by laying 7. They're covering these games, and all of these games are competitively priced with just one game more than a field goal, and that by only half a point. Would not be surprised if Indianapolis wins straight up, but I would also expect that if Houston wins, it's going to be something like maybe 23-20, 21-17 or something like that, because their only blowout win, and by blowout win, I mean by more than one score, actually by more than 6 points. Of course, that fumble against Chicago might have presented, but it's still part of the game. That their only blowout win came on the road at New England, as far as their winning comfortably goes. And Indianapolis has not been involved in a game, win or lose, decided by more than 6 points.
Yeah, these teams keep it close. I think it'll stay close. And that 41-21 win over the Patriots, there are just a lot of New England mistakes. I feel like it's not like Houston played that well in that game. It was just Drake May making a lot of mistakes, a lot of penalties. There were 2 penalties that turned field goals into touchdowns early in the game. And New England, as we know, is just one of the worst teams in the NFL. So you can't really judge. You can't factor that into Houston's evaluation, because most teams would beat the Patriots that way. Glad we're on the same wavelength there. The next game is Cardinals at the Dolphins. So this line moved up to 4 today, I think because Tua Tagovailoa practiced fully. So it looks like he's going to be back this week, barring a setback. So I could see why this line is moving up, but I still like Arizona. As I said on Tuesday, there is a very dubious track record of quarterbacks coming off concussions in their first game. It's just so difficult to kind of like to see how like they're seeing the field, because like if someone's coming off a torn ACL or a torn Achilles, you can see if their explosion's gone. But someone coming off a concussion, you can't. It's not apparent on the field. But these quarterbacks have an issue in their first game back from a concussion. And it's not like Miami is playing well anyway. The Dolphins, in their 2 or 1.5 games to Tua, they almost lose to the Jaguars at home with that great advantage that they had under the sun. And then in week 2, they're getting blown out by the Bills. So why would they suddenly beat Arizona by more than 4? The Cardinals, the only downside I could say about the Cardinals is that they're coming off a win on a short week. But I still like them here. They've been competitive for most games this year. They're a couple of blowouts, but against some of the better teams in the NFL. I don't see the Dolphins as one of the better teams in the NFL. So it wouldn't surprise me if Arizona won outright. I like the +4. What do you think about this game?
It all depends on Tua and whether he plays, how effective he is. Of course, the Dolphins need to, if they have any hopes of getting back into the playoffs, they need to start winning. And having Tua out there would certainly be an overall morale booster for the team. At the same time, you would think the Dolphins are smart enough to not want to rush him back and take a chance that he gets lost, not just for this season, but maybe for his career. Remember, the talk a few days after the injury was, maybe he should retire. It's not his first concussion, and we've seen the effect that it's had on other quarterbacks who, as you point back, maybe come back a little bit too soon. So unless I know the status of Tua, it's almost like if you think that Tua is going to make a difference, and he's announced as a starter on Sunday morning, or maybe even Saturday, maybe that you have to pay a little bit more as far as the price goes, because the money would come in on Miami. The Cardinals, I'm concerned about their defensive numbers over the last few weeks and the decline production-wise as far as their offense goes. Now, of course, they have played their last 4 games, their last 5 games, maybe all of their games this year. Look who they've played. Buffalo, playoff team, considered a contender. Rams, playoff team from last year. Injuries, they still have an opportunity to turn their season starting tonight. Detroit, Super Bowl contender. Washington, a team that appears to look more like at least a playoffs contender week after week. San Francisco, maybe one of the weaker teams on this list, but still have to be considered a playoff contender, although, again, they, like the Rams, are dealing with a lot of injuries. Green Bay, a contender. The Chargers, certainly a much improved team over last year. So maybe what we've seen out of Arizona has a lot to do with the competition that they faced, because even those teams that I mentioned are struggling, like the Rams and the 49ers, they still have plenty of talent, just not the healthy talent that they've had the last few years. So I could certainly understand if Tua does not play and the line even goes down a little bit, Arizona would be a money line play in that game. With Tua, I'm more inclined to pass the game only because of the uncertainty. Having a competent quarterback, there's a huge drop-off from Tua, even not at 100%, although the concussion may be a special type of not 100%. There's a huge drop-off between him and the other quarterbacks, and that might be evident because it might get guys like Waddle back involved in the game and may open up the running game again. So that uncertainty says, for me, it's either Arizona straight up, plus whatever points would be available. Without Tua, probably pass if Tua plays. Maybe I would look under in both cases also.
Okay, a great point on Arizona's competition this year, and I did like them coming into the year, but yeah, if they face mostly good teams, it's pretty tough schedule, so it might get easier here. I think Miami's not played well at all this year. John says Tyreek Hill popped up on the injury report today. I said that's something I missed. Yeah, he was downgraded to limited today, so he still practiced, but still. If he's not completely healthy, that's another reason to like Arizona. And one other thing.
By the way, in fact, if Tyreek Hill does not play and Tua does play, that's probably a cancellation out, maybe even more of a cancellation because of Hill being out rather than Tua.
Well, it might mean Mike McDaniel just gets Alec Ingold more involved. As I pointed out last night, remarkably, in the last game, Alec Ingold, the team's fullback, had as many touches as Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle combined. So not the best offensive strategy by Mike McDaniel. John saying take the fish. The Cardinals are going to melt on the sidelines. It's important because of how Miami Stadium is designed. I looked at the weather though, only 81 and chance of rain. So I don't think the weather is not going to play much of a factor in this one. The heat.
I think wasn't the old Vikings? I think they used to have the opposition sit on the sunny side of the colder side of the field.
It's like the opposite. Yeah. It's you have to get every advantage you can. Yeah. Only 81's not that bad. Like usually Miami is like in the 90s or high 80s.
Well, it's the humidity also I think would be a factor there because of the surrounding water.
Well, if it rains, maybe that'll cool things down a little bit. I don't know. Whatever. So let's get to the next game. We have the Falcons and the Buccaneers. This line's Falcons -2.5. The advanced spread was Tampa -2.5. And
that's a very strange line.
Agreed.
Atlanta 2.5. Considering the injuries they just suffered to the same position, wide receiver, on Monday night, and now they've got a short week.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So they won't have a Godwin. They won't have Evans. They may not even have Bucky Irving.
They may not even have a prayer.
They have these cluster injuries now at what was their best position, and now they're going to be playing Jalen McMillan, Trey Palmer, Sterling Shepard. I agree with you. I think Atlanta looks. I assume you like Atlanta just based on what you said. I like Atlanta quite a bit here. So, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I'm just surprised that the line has stayed at 2.5 this week. I mean, we've known about the injuries since Monday night, and they still have other injuries as well, including on the defense. We saw Baltimore take advantage of that the other night. Atlanta. Okay, they were due for a bad game. They got it out of the way. They got beaten at home by Seattle by 20 points. Seattle in control all the way. And Seattle was a very popular play for the Sharps last week. They had a 3-game winning streak, 2 of which were at home. The one before, I forgot what Seattle had. They were coming off, I think, let me call it up here for a second. Going into that game, they were coming off 3 losses in a row, and yet were receiving a lot of positives. Now, of course, 2 of the losses were Detroit on the road and San Francisco at home, but an injured San Francisco. The other loss was in the middle, but that was the wacky game against the Giants, where the stats were still favored the Giants a little bit because the Giants did gain over 400 yards in that game. But I was somewhat surprised by the enthusiasm shown for Seattle last week, given how they were coming into that game and the fact that Atlanta had actually won 3 in a row and they were all division games. So maybe that was a little bit of a letdown there. Nonetheless, that enthusiasm for Seattle last week was well placed. Now that Atlanta has another game against Tampa Bay, and remember, they won that first game against Tampa Bay 36-30, the home game. This, by the way, it's Atlanta's only 3rd road game of the season. And they actually won both previous road games. One at Philadelphia, that I think was that Monday night game, and then Carolina 2 weeks ago, 38-20, where it was a little bit close throughout, and then the second half, Atlanta took over. But in that game against Tampa Bay, they only ran for 73 yards, but they were able to pass for 477 yards against Tampa Bay in that game. And just to put that in a little bit of perspective, in Tampa Bay's 7 games, 5 of the opponents passed for 264 yards or less. The only other one, Detroit, in a game that Tampa won in Detroit, they passed for 324, but this is 153 yards more. So Atlanta may have similar success. And again, if it gets into be a shootout, and Atlanta may be capable of doing that, I don't know how Tampa Bay is able to match them score for score.
I think Atlanta was looking ahead to this game last week. It's one of the reasons why I like Seattle. The other being coming off an embarrassing loss on national TV against the Niners, and they had extra rest to prepare for this one. But no, Atlanta, because they know they're not going to get the number 1 seed, so it's all about winning the division because it comes with a home playoff game. And that Seattle game didn't really mean anything. I think this is the one that means the most.
If you look at their schedule, let me just interrupt for a second here. They host Dallas next week. Then they're at New Orleans, a division game, so that they may get a better effort out of New Orleans, although it may not. Then they're at Denver. That's very much a game that Denver may very well be favored in that one. Then a bye week. Then Atlanta hosts the Chargers. Who knows what the line will be in that game because the Chargers are a better team. Then they're at Minnesota. Probably a small underdog in that game unless Minnesota either reverses their direction of last week in this or they continue their free fall, in which Atlanta might be more competitively priced at Minnesota. Their season may come down to winning 3 of their final 4 games, and of the 3 that they're likely to win at Vegas, I'll be at that game actually, against the Giants and against Carolina, because the game in week 17, the second game of the season, at Washington. Now, the only thing that might keep that away from being a game that they might be expected to lose, believe it or not, I can't believe I'm saying it, Washington may have secured their playoff position by that time.
Yeah, it could be. I just think that, look at the division, really. And if they sweep the Buccaneers here, then they have they're going to be 4-0 in the division as well. So they're going to be in great shape.
They'll be division favorites, and you'll probably have to lay a price for them if you want to bet them to win the division.
Yeah, they'll effectively be 2 up on Tampa, and with Tampa being without Evans for a while, and then Godwin for the rest of the year. So I like.
And New Orleans struggling also, especially with the quarterback situation, and Carolina being Carolina.
Yeah, Carolina. We'll get to them in a little bit. Let's get to the next game. We have Jets at the Patriots. So the Jets.
Do we have Bears at Commanders?
That was moved to 4:00. So yeah.
Okay. You're doing it in sequence order, not schedule order. That's fine.
Yeah. So sorry about that. So Jets at the Patriots here. The Jets are favored by 7. No Elijah Vera Tucker, no Alan Lazard, no Licky Fotu in practice. They were both.
What's the story with Reddick?
I assume he's going to play. I didn't see any practice reports for him. I'll look very quickly, but I didn't see anything that really stood out. Maybe he's limited. Reddick is he's not even on the injury report, so. I guess he's going to play. I don't know because he's not on the injury report at all. So I assume that I assume he's not going to be 100%, but I think he's going to play. So we'll see. But given if the Jets were playing a decent team, I don't know if I'd like them to bounce back. The old saying goes. I think Dave Koken, the late Dave Koken, said this. He said. I don't know if he was quoting anyone, but I remember him saying, if a team needs to win, they're probably not good enough in the first place, which could be true for the Jets. However, they're playing the Patriots, who are just dreadful, coming back from overseas. They already lost once to the Jets in a blowout. I think they're going to be better this time because of Drake May, but their offensive line is in worse shape now than it was back in week 3. Their defense is still bad. They can't stop the run at all. Feels like this is going to be a big Breece Hall game. The only downside here is the Jets play on Thursday night. So that's usually a pitfall for these big favorites. But given that they're 2-5 and they can't afford this loss, another loss, I think they covered the spread. Even though it's a high line, I think it's high for a reason. So I'm gonna be on the Jets. What are your thoughts on this one?
I can't play New England. I might be a bit uncomfortable playing the Jets. I need to do more of a deep dive here. In that first game, the Jets had a balanced offense against the Patriots, so let's give them credit for that until you hear the balance consisted of 78 yards rushing and 61 yards passing for 139 total yards, while allowing 400 yards to the while allowing the Jets to rush for 133 and 267 through the air for 400. I don't know. Does the gap close that much that you can make a case? They lost 24-3 in that game. Interestingly enough, the Jets were favored by 6.5 in that game, and now they're basically favored by the same amount, despite the fact that it's on the road. So they've clearly downgraded the Jets because of their failure to live up to expectation. In fact, they've lost 4 in a row, failed to cover all 4. But at the same time, they may have also downgraded New England even more, which keeps the line at where it was, despite the fact that usually there's anywhere from a 2 to 5 point difference when you go from a pure home game to a pure road game, and which is such is the case here. You look at New England. Yeah, they beat the Bengals. They lost by 3 to Seattle. Then they lose by 21, 17, 5 at home to Miami, 20 to Houston, and 16 in London to Jacksonville. The Jets, at least in a few of their losses, they were competitive. Now, yeah, it was a one-sided game against San Francisco to open the season. A 1-point loss to Denver, a 6-point loss to Minnesota at London, and the 3-point loss to Buffalo. So maybe I could make a little bit more of a case for playing the Jets here. Probably won't play it, but the only side I could consider would be the Jets.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense. I couldn't imagine backing the Patriots at all. So yeah, Adams and Reddick weren't even on the team last game, as John points out. That's a great.
And my first instinct was to make a case for the Patriots getting that many points when they were getting that many points, but didn't come close to covering on the road. But then upon second and third evaluations, I eliminated playing on the Patriots. Now with my fourth and fifth evaluations over the next day or so, it may be turning me to be on the Jets. But it's probably one of those games that's sort of like my indecisiveness and leaning against playing Tennessee in the game where I said I can't play Detroit because of the situation, and the same thing with Cleveland. I may be that similarly reluctant to back the Jets, even though I may consider them to be the right side.
It's just hard to back these horrible teams. Especially the past.
And you got two horrible teams here, but one is horrible because of talent. One is horrible because of dysfunction.
Yeah, the coaching. I don't understand the coaching move they made. Firing Saleh, whatever. But giving the defensive coordinator the head coaching duties, I thought kind of diluted.
That's the strength of the team.
Right.
And Saleh was a defensive coach. Okay, and the Jets' problems weren't the defense. So now you not only fire a defensive coach whose unit was working the best, you take away the defensive coordinator who was spending 100% of his time coaching that really good defense, and now his responsibilities are divided.
Yep,
made no sense.
It's a huge misstep, I think, by them. Anyway, let's get to the last of the early games. We have the Eagles at the Bengals. It wasn't too long ago that the Bengals took the Ravens into overtime. They led by double digits on 3 occasions, and they had the win in the bag. They had the ball over midfield in overtime. For some reason, Zach Taylor decides to run the ball like crazy, and then they lose. So I think the Ravens are better than the Eagles, and so it kind of makes sense to like the Bengals here, even though they're minus 2.5 as opposed to they plus 2.5 in that game. So I like Cincinnati here. As far as updates are concerned, I've nothing new. Nothing new popped up on the injury report. So no real changes from my stance on this game from Tuesday. So what do you think about this one?
Well, you take a look at Philadelphia, and you look at. I always like to look at teams who they play next. Philadelphia hosts Jacksonville. Cincinnati hosts Las Vegas. So really, not that much of a difference as far as it being an important game or a key game. Especially for Philadelphia because it's a non-conference rival as opposed to Cincinnati hosting the Raiders. Mm-hmm. The concern I have for Cincinnati is the last 2 weeks, they finally get decent defensive efforts. They limited the Giants to 309 yards. They limited the Browns to 336 yards, and yet they could only muster. They were actually outgained by the Giants by a few yards, and they were outgained by Cleveland 217 to 336. They could only muster 17 points and 21 points. Now, to their credit or for their good fortune, they won those games, but I don't know that they're going to be able to limit Philadelphia to single digits, or let's say under 20 points. And if they give up more than 20 points, they may have some difficulty because they should have been able to put more points up against both the Giants and Cleveland. And remember, in that Giants game, the last touchdown that made it for 17-7 from 10-7 was on that run at the very end of the game when they were basically running out the clock, and the Giants decided they didn't want to risk injury by trying to make a tackle or something like that. But nonetheless, and Philadelphia played Cleveland just the week before. In fact, these teams switched. It's really a weird scheduling dynamic. Cincinnati's last 2 games at Giants, at Cleveland. Philly's last 2 games home against Cleveland, at the Giants. And the Eagles played those games a lot better than Cincinnati did. And I just wonder, finally last week, and of course Barkley had a lot to do with it against his former team, 269 yards, on the rushing the ball. He had 176 of them, which was more than the Giants gained in total. The Giants gained 119 yards. Of course, a lot of that had to do with all the yardage that came off the passing yards due to both teams being sacked. I believe the Giants were sacked, 8 times, and the Eagles 5 times. So that's why those passing yardage numbers look as bad as they do, because they do count that as going against passing yards, and part of the net yards reflect that. I have the sense that the Eagles have started to turn things around a little bit. They've had a couple of close games this year. They had that win at New Orleans when they needed it after the loss to Atlanta that they blew on Monday night. They opened the season with that win in Brazil. If this line goes to 3, I'll almost certainly be on the Eagles. At 2.5, maybe I will, but I'm more likely to pass.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I'm not in love. Actually, I like Cincinnati a little bit. Not one of my favorite plays, but I do think that they're the right side. But anyway, let's get to the late game.
I'd like to go against Cincinnati's coach, but he's playing Philadelphia's coach, who I also like to go against in many situations.
Yeah, they kind of nullify each other there. I'm with you. I'm not a big fan of either. All right, Bills and Seahawks. Nothing new on the injury report here. Metcalf was DNP twice, but that was by design. They said they're going to test his knee out on Friday to see if he can play. I wouldn't count on him playing, but I guess you never know. Puka Nacua, for example, was a surprise active today, and he went off. So you never know with these guys. These guys are just unbelievable specimens. It wouldn't shock me if he played, but I don't think he will. So anyway, I'm pretty torn on this game. I think you can make cases for both sides here. With the Bills, I feel like they're still gelling. I think they're going to be a lot better come December when Josh Allen has chemistry with Amari Cooper, and Amari Cooper knows the playbook. So making the Bills a 3-point road favorite when they're still developing chemistry against a decent team, I think is not great. But then again, like Seattle is, they're going to be without Metcalf, and it's not a cluster injury situation, but Metcalf is so good that he just opens up everything for everyone else. So I'm torn on this one. I'm leaning Buffalo. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'm also looking towards Buffalo as a play. Probably feel that along the similar lines with Green Bay, because, again, I mentioned the reasons why I can make a case for Jacksonville, and I could probably do the same for Seattle. They are coming home after a very impressive and much-needed win after losing 3 straight to Detroit, the Giants, and the 49ers, the latter 2 of which were at home. Well, if you look at Buffalo, they're 5-2. The 2 losses were to a pair of teams that had double-digit wins last year and are off to good starts this year. The 35-10 shocking loss at Baltimore, shocking to the extent that it was so one-sided, but then again, they were coming off that 47-10 shellacking at Jacksonville the previous, Monday night. And then the following week, they're at Houston, and they lose late 23-20. So those are excusable losses. Baltimore, because of the situation they were in and the fact that it was Baltimore, and Houston because they're a good football team and they've shown it so far this year, and they do have a tendency, like we've said with Indianapolis, their opponent this week, that they play close games. Then they came back and they struggled more than expected, although everyone loved the Jets in that game against Buffalo. The Buffalo Bills, I think, ended up going off a 1-point favorite after the Jets were favored for a good part of the week. And then last week, they overcame that sluggish start. When I look at the fundamentals, I'm concerned about Seattle's inability to have success against the rush. If you look at what they did this year, they held Denver to 99 yards. Okay, not a big surprise. This is a big surprise. On the road, the Patriots ran for 185 yards against the Seattle defense. But Seattle came back the next week at home against Miami and limited the Dolphins to 65 yards on the ground. But that's where any decent news ends. 116 on the road allowed to Detroit, 175 at home allowed to the Giants, 228 allowed at home to the 49ers, and 155 in that big win last week against Atlanta. So I'm concerned that they allowed that many yards despite the fact that they were playing with a big lead the whole game, and Atlanta continued to run. And why not continue to run, even though passes are more effective if you're having the kind of success that they had? So I'm a little bit concerned about that. And when I look at Buffalo, they gave up 124 and 139 on the ground the first 2 weeks to Arizona and Miami. Held Jacksonville to 92, and then their worst game of the season, 271 in that one-sided loss to Baltimore. The last the 3 games, 94 on the road to Houston, 121 in the win over the Jets, and 89 last week against Tennessee. So whereas Buffalo seems to be improving for the most part on the defending the run, Seattle seems to be doing the reverse, especially when you consider their two best games of the year against Denver and Miami was sandwiched between allowing 185 to the Patriots. So I like Buffalo. I think that this is still a legitimate team. Again, when I say I understand when you lose on the road to two playoff caliber teams, and that's exactly what the situation with Buffalo. I'm not sure I would still put Seattle in the category of a playoff caliber team, other than the fact that they could go 9-8 or 10-6 and 10-7, and that might win the West.
Yeah, Slew bringing up a good point here. They've struggled against the run, but the defensive line is getting healthier, and they traded for Ernest Jones, who's really good against the run. So that should help them stop the run
if they can develop timing.
Yeah. And you never know. The first game with the team might have some chemistry issues, but
and I also give I like what Geno Smith has done, but I have to give a noticeable edge to Allen.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree with that. All right, so Saints at the Chargers. So I said on Tuesday that I like the Chargers. I'm going to backtrack here because the Saints are getting a lot of players back from injury. Cesar Ruiz and Lucas Patrick on the offensive line. Pete Werner, linebacker over the middle of the field. He's going to help their defense out a lot. Chris Olave is tracking to come back. Taysom Hill, like five key players returning for the Saints. So this is not going to be the same pushover that we saw on Thursday night against the Broncos. That doesn't mean they're going to win or even cover, but they're going to be way more competitive than they were. The Chargers might have cluster injuries at receiver. Quentin Johnson was out already. He was DNP twice. Ladd McConkey also DNP twice. So looks like they could be down their top two receivers. So you're going to have a big favorite in Justin Herbert throwing to Will Dissly and Simi Fehoko and Joshua Palmer. Just it's a dreadful receiving core. So I originally was on the Chargers. Now I'm going to be on the Saints. And by the way, Saints have a good rest advantage here. The Chargers played Monday night. The Saints played Thursday. So nice edge there for New Orleans. The one thing I don't like here is Saints backup quarterback against a Charger defense that's really good. So I'm not looking to play the game, but I'm no longer on the Chargers. So what do you think about this one?
I'm also looking at New Orleans for a number of reasons. You mentioned a lot of what they're getting back, but also the fact that the Chargers like to slow the game down. That's Jim Harbaugh's tendency. He likes to turn it over to the offensive line, whether it be short passes or just running the ball. Although Herbert did have his two best passing days the last 2 weeks. Now, a little of an asterisk with the 222 yards against Denver on the road 2 weeks ago. They were down. What was it? The Broncos were down 23-0 in that game when they came back to make it 23-16. So they had a pass, and Chargers were just saying, "Okay, take your time, gain your yards. We're still going to win." Last week, a little bit more activity from Herbert, 336 yards. That's by far his season high, because the 222 previously was his season high by over 50 yards. So a little bit more of the passing activity, and they might have success against the Saints. But I do think that the Saints will be able to put some more points on the board than we've seen the last couple of weeks. Now, remember, the Saints, when they were fully healthy, 47 in week 1 against Carolina, 44 the next week at Dallas. Then 12 in a 15-12 loss to Philly, and they started losing players, 24-13 against Kansas City, 27 against Tampa, and a lot of that came when they were deeply behind, and then 10 last week against Denver on the Thursday night game. So I think because of San Diego, I almost said San Diego, because you know what? I abbreviate them in my database as SDLA. So okay. I always see the SD first. So I
always call them San Angeles Chargers.
Oh, okay. You could do that. I just do it because I use 4 characters to designate team names in my database, like NYJ, NYG, etc. Nonetheless, the Chargers, they do have a great defense. They've not given up more than 20 points this year. They've given up 10, 3, 20, 17, 16, and 17. So maybe New Orleans can come close to getting to the 20, but that might be enough to win. You look at the total points in Charger games this year. Here's what I believe they've not yet hit 40 points in a game. 32, 29, 30, 27, 39, 32. That's their first 6 games. 4 on the road, 2 at home, etc. And the point spreads have been reasonable. Only 1 point spread above 4.5 in Charger games. So they've been in competitively priced games. So the Saints are underdogs, I think, for a 5th straight week, understandably so. I could see the Chargers winning this game somewhere along the lines of, one of those nice scores, 23-20, 20 to 16 or something like that. It's their modus operandi on both sides of the football. I'm not sure yet which one I feel more comfortable with, whether I feel comfortable with the under or the Saints plus the points, but it's quite likely I'll have a little something at least on both.
Makes sense. So I'm just saying, did you see Schefter's breakdown on the Titans total ROI and the Ernest Jones moves? I have not. I'll definitely take a look at that. I was saying before, I call them San Angeles Chargers just so I don't make a mistake. So I never will. And also, it's a good callback to Demolition Man, one of my a great classic movie. So anyway, let's get to the next game. We finally get to that Washington game that there was a time change on. So Chicago, Washington. The advanced line was Washington was favored by, what was it, 1.5, I think, or 2.5.
2.5 was the advanced line a week ago this past Tuesday. Then I think it came off the board during the playing of the games. I think we may have mentioned it a little bit earlier, whether it was before we went on the air or when we were talking, we got distracted elsewhere. Then when it got taken off the board, the books put it back up in many places with Washington -1. This was after they knew that the injury occurred to Daniels, and he was considered more likely to not start than to start this year because of the rib injury. The public initially bet that up to -1, and then on Monday, I think it started coming in where the money started to push them up to 2.5. Because remember, Chicago's coming off of a bye, so they didn't have any action to evaluate last week. So I can understand it. Yeah, we did talk about that because I mentioned that's like a 5-point move between underdog and between going from. I often will take a look. And I don't have the numbers, but I seem to recall, this is sort of anecdotal, that when a team gets bet from a favorite to the underdog, the favorite usually covers. In other words, the lines maker was right, and the quote-unquote fascination with a small road underdog proves an incorrect move. Not all the time, but I notice it happens so frequently, both in colleges and the NFL, other than if there's an intervening injury that comes to light, like during the week.
So you're saying the new favorite covers, or the team that was favorite?
The original favorite. That the line maker was correct in making. Now this is a little bit different, but even so, after they assessed the injury, they still had Washington a 1-point favorite, and the public has moved up. In fact, I think I'll go back. Weren't the Bears like 2-point favorites at Jackson in the game against Jacksonville, and they closed favored by 1.5?
Yeah, Jacksonville ended up being.
And that was a neutral site. Yeah.
Yes. Right.
And forget the game. I mean, I gladly would have, when I played the game, I gladly would have laid the 2.5 with the Bears. That's how much I like that game. But that's just the latest example. I can go back and take a look at some point while you're giving an analysis. I can listen. I can multitask my ears and my fingers and my eyes.
Well, yeah, I actually have never looked at that, so I'm kind of interested to hear your thoughts on that. So I do like Chicago a little bit. I know.
Oh, by the way, I haven't given my assessment of the game. I'll do that after you're done. Okay. I'll just talk about the lines.
Okay. I do like Chicago a little bit. I know Marcus Mariota looked great last week. He went 18 of 23. Now that was against Carolina, and I feel like most backup quarterbacks, except for maybe Tim Boyle's the exception, would look good against Carolina. And so I think that's the most misleading stat. I like this is a huge upgrade in terms of strength of opponent. Like Chicago's defense has been excellent this year. The pass rush has been better than expected. The secondary has some good playmakers. Although Jaquan Brisker he's been DMP twice, so something to look out for. But I still think Chicago's defense is really good. So you look at backup quarterbacks against tough defenses, they usually do not fare well. Whereas like if they play against mediocre or bad defenses, they usually do well. So that is why that's one of the reasons why I like Chicago. And also one thing to note, like Jane Daniels has not practiced yet, so I expect him to be out. But like crazier things have happened, I suppose. As Drew says, shouldn't Jane Daniels be able to play with a flak jacket? I don't think he's going to play. I'd be surprised if they put him out there 1 week after. But yeah, it says he can't play with the flak jacket, but he might have a difficult time breathing when he has to run. Yeah, I don't see the point in playing him. Like why trot him out there so soon? Like you can let him recover for a week. I don't know. I mean, the coaches have done like dumber things, I suppose. But I don't know. I feel like let Mariota do his thing for 1 week, and then have him come back after that. So, did you get those numbers, Andy, or are you ready?
Yes, I did. There's only been 5 instances this year where a team has gone from an underdog to a favorite, and those teams are 2 and 3. So really not very meaningful as far as that goes. As far as this game goes, buys sometimes come at a very bad time. And that's the case for Chicago. They were 1 and 2. They had that win against Tennessee where they were thoroughly, pretty much outplayed, but took advantage of some special teams, and they had no offensive touchdowns. And they beat Tennessee, and then they lost back. In fact, they played 3 straight AFC South opponents, and they lost at Houston and Indianapolis the following 2 weeks. Then they come home and they beat the Rams for their second win. They beat Carolina, and then they beat Jacksonville. Not exactly a great trio of teams other than what you may think about the Rams. Certainly Carolina and Jacksonville fit into the definition of not very good teams. Yeah. Now they get a bye. Now forget the fact that they're not very good teams. They're still wins. And the Bears have gained a lot of confidence, and Williams has shown consistent development over the ensuing 3 weeks. And I think the worst thing that could happen is all of a sudden you got to get out of your routine and you get time off. Yeah, there's things beneficial to time off, but nonetheless, I think you're by Sunday night, they're looking forward to playing the next game, notwithstanding the fact that they want to get over their injuries and everything. It's sort of a little, tongue in cheek, but you know what I'm saying, that there's a lot of enthusiasm that gets broken up because of the time off. Which is a lot different than when you're playing on a Thursday night and, then you have 10 days off. When you have like basically 2 weeks off, it's totally different as far as what you do in that first week. And you look at Washington, and, they started with that loss to Tampa Bay, but they've been playing good football ever since. Even that loss against Baltimore was not a devastating loss, and they actually had a chance late to perhaps force overtime, and then they did what they did against Carolina last week. I like Mariota. I like the fact that he is a proven quantity and quality as well. He's 30 years old, but it's a young 30 because he missed a lot of time over the seasons that he's been in the league, either as a result of being a backup somewhere else or just being injured, as has also been the case. And he showed he can do last week. And, of course, now the little negative is that the Bears will be prepared for him. And they do have a fairly good defense, maybe not at the level yet that we're accustomed to seeing, let's say, from last year from the Bears. But I like the fact that Washington is coming off, well, again, it's Carolina, but, the Bears played Carolina as well. And the Bears... the Bears allowed in a 36-10 win, so almost as lopsided as the Commanders win. They gave up 292 yards to Carolina, 120 and 172. Washington held Carolina to 95 and 85. So a really impressive effort by the Washington defense that, aside from that game against Baltimore, has really played well. After giving up 37, 18, and 33 points in their first 3 games, the next 4 games, 14 in a nice road win at what had been a solid Arizona offense, 13 in the 34-13 win against a Cleveland team whose offense is not at that level. Then, of course, the 30 points to Baltimore, and then, of course, 7 points, which is about average for Carolina. Not far off anyway. The Carolina's not averaging very many. So I like the improvement that I'm seeing out of the Washington defense overall, not just in points, but in yardage allowed. They've allowed 3 of their last 4 opponents to pass for under 150 net yards, taking the sacks off. So I like that as well. And it's not surprising, again, because Dan Quinn's background before he became a head coach was as a defensive coordinator. In fact, he was part of some of the good Seattle teams that we'd seen in the past. So nonetheless, as a result, I like Washington in this game. And again, if I can get a team that should have been favored, if it were a huge drop off between Daniels and Mariota, and maybe it's even less of a drop off than we would normally even think, because remember, Daniels is still a rookie. So you're considering a drop off from a rookie. Usually, when you drop off from an established quarterback to a backup, whether he's experienced or not, it's usually a noticeable drop off. I'm not so sure it's that case, partially because of what Mariota has proven throughout his career, and also the fact that Daniels is still a rookie. And you'd have to think that whatever advanced preparation that Chicago may have been doing, not necessarily the players, because they probably had the week off, but the coaching staff during the first week of their bye, were probably preparing for Jalen Daniels.
Yeah, that's true. It does nullify the bye week advantage that they had outside of the rest. So, yeah, I mean, you make some good points here for Washington. I still remain pretty neutral in the game, but it is surprising how well Washington's defense has played, even though
I was looking forward to this. I was looking forward to this game because of the matchup of the two number one quarterbacks who were both off to great starts. But both Chicago and Washington have been play-on teams for me this year, almost like Indianapolis and Houston have been, despite the close games. But Colts have been underdogs, as we mentioned, and winning some of those games. When I am faced with two teams that I like to play on, I either pass or take the points.
Okay, makes sense.
Whoever the underdog is between two teams I like to play on.
Yeah.
So had Washington been the favorite with Daniels, there's a good chance I would have been on Chicago, plus the 2.5 or 3.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like I said, I don't have a strong take in this one, so I would definitely trust you here. All right, let's get to the next one. So Chiefs at the Raiders. I see some 9.5s out there. It's still some 10s as well. Which is kind of confusing because the Raiders had a couple of downgrades in practice. Max Crosby downgraded from full to DNP on Thursday, so that's a concern, I suppose. Jacoby Myers downgraded from limited to DNP. Maybe this is just rest, but I don't know. Downgrades are usually bad. I like the Chiefs here. I know that there might be a motivational lack of motivation for the Chiefs. But I will push
Not
back.
so. That was the last game. The last team that they lost to, the Chiefs, were the Raiders last year, late in the season.
Yeah, on Christmas, yes. But it's still, if I'm looking at the Chiefs and like the Raiders are the laughing stock now, I don't know. Like it's like you almost like beat up on your little brother all these times and then he beats you once. Like, are you going to take him seriously? I don't know. But like, what?
Yeah, you're gonna say him, hey, little brother, you're not doing it again.
Maybe, but something that Evan brought up, and I thought it was funny that the Raiders had a Kermit the Frog puppet that they were messing around with, and they used it as Patrick Mahomes, and then Mahomes was asked about it, and he said it will be taken care of in due time. So maybe maybe he'll have that chip on his shoulder here. I don't know how you play the Raiders here. They're just so bad, especially with Minshew just throwing the ball to the other team with reckless abandon. Is like at least Aiden O'Connell was taking care of the ball. Minshew is just a disaster. The Raiders can't block. If Crosby's not healthy, the Raiders have nothing going on for them on defense. All they have really is Brock Bowers, who I see Spagnuolo could double team him. Spagnuolo loves to double team the other top option. So if Myers doesn't play, it's an easy double team on Bowers, and you have to wonder how the Raiders move the ball. So I think the Chiefs win easily. What are your thoughts on this one?
I don't know how easily they can win, which doesn't mean I'm looking at the Raiders, because I'm not. Mm-hmm. But when you take a look at the Chiefs this year, they win by 7 because of the toe that was outside the end zone against Baltimore. They come from behind to beat Cincinnati by 1. They win by 5 at Atlanta in a game where the penalty should have been called, and Atlanta probably goes on to win that game, or certainly has an opportunity in the final minute. They win by 7 at the Chargers when the Chargers were up for a good part of that game. They scored sometime in the second half. They did win by 13 at home against a somewhat banged up New Orleans team, certainly without their starting quarterback Carr. And then they win on the road last week. I did have the Chiefs last week. I liked them a lot last week because it was as much on the Chiefs as it was anti-San Francisco. And again, Andy Reid against Kyle Shanahan. So they haven't really been putting together. In fact, I think they said last in the game against the 49ers that the 28 points scored by the 49ers were like the most amount of points that Kansas City has scored since sometime mid-second half of last season, which is somewhat of a surprise on the surface. But then again, when you think about it, the defense was a large reason why the Chiefs had the success they had last year, and it's been the same thing this year. They gave up 185 rushing yards in that first game to Baltimore. Since then, 74, 82, 55, 46, 101 to San Francisco. And that's not come at the expense of passing yards. They gave up 267 to the Baltimore game, but they've yet to given up more than 246 yards passing in the following 5 games. Combination of effective pass defense and sacks that reduce those numbers. So the Kansas City defense may be the reason why they cover in this game, because if you look at the Raiders, they haven't scored. They've scored more than 22 points once this year: 10, 26, 22, 20, 18, 13, and 15. And, I don't see what has happened that could cause the Raiders to score. So as a result, I'll probably play this game under. I won't play either side. If I had to play a side, it would probably be Kansas City, because I could also see Kansas City taking advantage of 1 or 2 turnovers, maybe get a defensive score or set the offense up in the red zone.
Yeah, under does make sense. You read off the results, and yeah, they've only blown out, or they've won by double digits twice this year, but the level of competition.
Oh yeah, sorry, 10 considered double digits. Yeah. Is double digits.
So, right. So,
and by the way, if you want to further amplify that, it's back-to-back weeks.
Right. But I'm also looking at the level of competition here. Except for the Saints, it feels like the Chiefs have played top teams like the Ravens. Obviously, we know they're in the top 5. They played the Bengals, who went to overtime against the Ravens, and the Bengals they played their hearts out in that game. Those games are always competitive. They beat the Falcons, who were in first place.
You know what? You need say no more. The Raiders hosted the Carolina Panthers and lost by 20, but lost by 14. That says it all. That was, by the way, when the schedules came out back in May, and I do a number of radio shows, including one locally here in Vegas. I said, of all the games on their schedule, and I think their season win total was like 6.5 or 7. I said, the only game I see them being favored this year is week 3 against Carolina. And so far that's been true. They were 5.5-point favorites. Now, in fact, in the Survivor contest, I was looking to play the Raiders in week 3 against Carolina. And then they had that comeback against Baltimore in week 2. So I didn't play the Raiders in that game. But so far, I was not nearly as optimistic as a lot of people have been on the Raiders this year. I took a look at the schedule, and I took a look at the fact that they, have Minshew. I actually thought Minshew was a decent acquisition. His play has not justified that thought. And O'Connell, I never really understood the enthusiasm for the pick, but nonetheless, and of course they had Antonio Pierce, who not quite a first-year coach because he was an interim coach. So yeah, if I had to play this side, I'd have to go with Kansas City simply because of the contributions the defense could make.
Yeah. So anyway, to finish off what I was saying, so the first 3 opponents, then they played the Chargers, who are a good team, and I mentioned the Saints. That was a blowout. Saints are not a good team, but then last week they played the Niners. They beat them by 10. It was even more of a blowout than that. It was 28. It was 28-10 or whatever it was. 20. Yeah. It was 2012. It's 2012. And the Niners are a good team. I mean, then the Chiefs took it to them on the road.
I would say right now, if you wanted to equate it, I'd say the 49ers are a good team, but more along the lines of a 10-7 good team.
Yeah,
right now, because of their injury situation.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And to start the game, they had Ayuk and Samuel. They lost Ayuk now. They were coming off that blowout win against Seattle. I think that the Niners are maybe not a great team this year, but a good team. So yeah, the Chiefs, outside of the Saints game, the Chiefs have played nothing but good teams this year. And this is by far their easiest opponent, because remember, the Saints at least had Derek Carr. This is by far the easiest opponent. So as long as they're focused, I think they could win easily. Their defense, I like.
I think as long as you're unbeaten, you are focused. That's important.
Yeah, Slou's saying, how do the Raiders score? It's a great question. Like weird special.
If Kansas City gets called for
return.
too few men on the field.
yeah, exactly. Like weird stuff.
But it
like
might they might only need to play with 7 on defense. Chiefs.
Yeah, just make it easier for them. That's really like the only way. So let's move on. Last of the late afternoon games.
I could give the Raiders maybe 10, possibly 13 points, but I would expect Kansas City to be in the mid-20s. And again, if the defense sets them up or scores, then you're looking at maybe even low 30s.
Yeah, I completely agree. All right, so Panthers at the Broncos. This line was much less, and unfortunately, Andy Dalton got into a car accident. He hasn't practiced since. They put him down as a thumb injury. So they said Bryce Young's going to start this game, which caused.
Was there any truth to the rumor that Bryce Young was driving the other car?
Well, someone yesterday said that David Tepper, the owner, was driving the other car.
Same line.
Yeah, exactly. So, so the spread shot up from 7.5 to 9.5 right away. Then now it's up to 10.5. So, everyone taking the Broncos, and I can't blame them. Bryce Young against this Denver defense just seems like a disaster waiting to happen. So, and if Bryce Young starting isn't it bad enough, Deontay Johnson has missed both practices so far this week. So, I know he's barely been practicing. So maybe he comes back on Friday, practices and plays, but. He's not healthy, and he's going to get the Patrick Surtain treatment here. Denver's not. I don't think Denver's that good of a team. They have a great defense. I don't trust their offense, but their offensive line is healthy again, which is nice. But they have blown out teams this year. Like they blew out the Saints last week. They blew out the Buccaneers in Week 3, and
that's the impressive win to point to.
Yeah, and they blew out the Raiders as well. So they have 3 blowout wins. Why can't they have a 4th? I can't back Carolina at all. This team is just dead to me. Their defense might be the worst defense we've ever seen in our lifetimes. Statistically, that is the case through 7 weeks. And their offense is trending downward. At least their offense was moving the ball with Andy Dalton, but now it's going to be Bryce Young. So this looks like 34-3 to me. I think Denver wins easily. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, the only question I want to find out if I can get an answer to is how the players feel about Bryce Young getting an opportunity. Did he handle, the demotion, well, understanding and everything? Because, maybe they like the kid, so maybe they try a little hard. Now, whether that'll translate into anything positive, unlikely. When you take a look, you talked about Carolina. Well, let me mention Denver. I like Denver. They lost those first 2 games to Seattle and Pittsburgh, both of whom are off to very good starts this year. And then they won 3 in a row, beginning with that one-sided win at Tampa Bay, 26-7. They had 352 yards of offense, and they limited the Bucs, who had been playing well, to 223 yards of offense. So the defense played well there, and the defense has been a strength, and it continues to generally play well. Then they had that 10-9 ugly win at the Jets, where everybody put up ugly numbers, certainly in the first half, if not for the entire game, where the Broncos had only 60 net passing yards. Then, of course, they had the nice easy win over the Raiders back home, and then they lost to the Chargers. I was on the Chargers in that one. I just liked the situation there. And then, of course, last week it was on the road, but they took care of business against the depleted New Orleans team. And I think we've seen Bo Nix at least from a really bad start to become relatively average in recent weeks. They've been putting up modest numbers through the air the last few weeks. But the main thing here, and look, they're 5-2 against the spread, okay? And, of course, now they're favored by the most that they've been favored in quite some time. In fact, the most they've only been favored in 2 games this year, both wins at home against Vegas and last week at the Saints. But look at Carolina. Their one win this year was that road win I talked about earlier, 36-22 at Vegas. Otherwise, here are their losses. 20 by 10 at home to Cincinnati, by 26 at Chicago, by 18 home to Atlanta, and by 33 last week at Washington. And now they're down. They're making a downgrade at quarterback to someone who maybe the team, whether they like him or not, can't have a great amount of confidence in him. And Denver is playing with great confidence right now. I'm right with you on that game, and that'll be one of my play in these contests this week, as well as out of pocket.
So asking, will the Broncos lose focus? The Ravens up next. What do you think?
No, they realize that they are in a division where maybe you can see the division title to Kansas City, but they're in competition certainly with the Chargers for second place and a wild card. Remember, this team last year, what were they, 8-9, I think? So as bad as they were, they still managed to be basically a 500 team with much less talent. Even with a struggling quarterback Wilson, 8-9 from 5-12 the year before. So they showed progress last year in what was Peyton's first year, where he was learning everything about, especially what it's like to play in the mile-high altitude of Denver, where he only played infrequently with the Saints. So yeah, normally you would think that Denver might have a look ahead, but especially when you take a look at some of the other teams in the AFC who have a chance that they would be contending with, Denver has to expect that its route to the playoffs is with a wild card, and they may also realize that they'll like to give Baltimore a good battle next week, but they won't be thinking this way, but in the mind of observers, it's likely a loss. This is a very winnable game, and they should try and get out to a lead, much like the Chargers did against them 2 weeks ago, so that maybe they can rest players in the second half if they're up, say, 24-3 at halftime, and they can give those players extra rest for that game against the Ravens.
Okay, makes sense. All right, so Sunday night game, I had a tough time handicapping this one. There's sharp money coming in on Dallas, I assume because of the Niners injuries. So Deebo Samuel went from DMP to limited. George Kittle as well, DMP to limited. We obviously know Brandon Ayuk is out for the year. Jawan Jennings, DMP twice. So that's the update on the Niners skill players. Michael Parsons has a chance to return, but he was DMP twice. So it's tough to say this right now because we don't know who's going to play. If all these guys are out for the 49ers, then I'm going to be on Dallas. But if Samuel and Kittle both play, then I think I'll like San Francisco, just knowing that the Niners will be able to run the ball on Dallas pretty easily. So, right now, I don't know. Where are you leaning on this game?
I like Dallas in this game. They're coming off that embarrassing loss to Detroit that followed that nice win, the Sunday night late comeback win against Pittsburgh. So they, I said with Chicago, buys sometimes come at the wrong time with all the momentum they had built up and the improvement that Williams had. Sometimes buys come at the right time, and that's the case with Dallas. I think they needed the time off. They needed to address the issues that they have on defense, which was expected to be a strength. Of course, they've already lost one of their players for a while, and now Parsons said on Monday morning, I believe, that he felt very comfortable that he would be playing this week, and that's probably a reason why he hasn't done practice this week, because give him extra time. He's a veteran now. He's one of the best players in the league. It's no big deal. Maybe he goes at half speed, if that, just to be familiar with the formations that they want to use in certain situations. I would not be surprised with or without the players who, if they do play for San Francisco, likely wouldn't be at 100%. Won't be shocked if Dallas wins this game outright.
Okay.
I'll take the 4, and it may even go up. If San Francisco does get those players to play, it's a good spot for Dallas. Who does San Francisco have next week? I think they've got. Is that Seattle again?
No, Seattle's the Rams. So the 49ers have a bye next week.
Okay, yeah. So maybe that does temper the enthusiasm a little bit. The bye will certainly come in handy for them for the rest. But I just like the spot for Dallas coming off of in fact, interestingly, Dallas is 3-0 at home this year, and they 0-3 at home this year after having that great home record the last couple of years. But they're 3-0 straight up on the road. They had that win at Pittsburgh, and I think they had the win at the Giants. And I'm trying to remember the third win that they had. That was at Cleveland to open the season, when Cleveland was a very fashionable team to get off to a good start, especially as a home underdog. And again, in fact, I remember mentioning after the first few games that Dallas had actually played better on the road, that game against Cleveland, than they did in the home games against the Saints and the Ravens. And remember, in the Ravens game, Ravens, I believe, were up 28-6, and they won 28-25 as Dallas got some late second half scores when Baltimore was running the ball and trying to just get out of there healthy. But I like the spot that Dallas is a more talented team than they've shown. Prescott has had some issues with turnovers, but I think getting Parsons back, which I expect, will be a big boost to the defense and a big boost to the morale. In fact, I think I made the comment that you talk about teams being hungry for a win. Well, the Cowboys are certainly hungry for a win based upon how they've played, but they may be literally hungry for a win because they had the bye last week, and I can imagine that unless they use DoorDash or Grubhub, they couldn't be seen in grocery stores shopping, either them or their wives, because of the situation that they were in after that Detroit game. So a little bit of a little humor, and unfortunately it's very little humor, but the point is that it's a good spot for Dallas, and they certainly should be prepared. And again, San Francisco, even healthy, has shown that they are not the team that they were last year. A lot of it did have to do with injuries. A lot of it also, when you talk about all the extra games that teams play, when you make the playoffs 4 or 5 years in a row, that's the equivalent of an extra season when you add up those extra playoff games, those 2 to 4 games a year.
Yeah, it's a great time to be a football player who's on a bad team because you never have to go out in public. You could just have people deliver groceries. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Steady asking, what is going on with Jacksonville? The bad coaching, bad offensive line play. Trevor Lawrence has regressed. They were using Travis Etienne way too much. Helps that they had Bigsby going on. Their pass defense was bad with Tyson Campbell out. Now he's back. So it's going to be
what they lose 6 of 7 at the end of last year, something like that.
Yeah, they started 8-3 and they finished 9-8. Trevor Lawrence picked up a new injury every week, so I thought they would bounce back. But
see, Lawrence Philadelphia at least has bounced. The Eagles had a similar end to their regular season last year. They've bounced back somewhat. They have, even though where the record is what it is, they've played better, certainly in a number of instances, than Jacksonville has. Really, the only game that Jacksonville, you could say, played like a football team that you said looks like a playoff team was last week against New England.
Yep. Yeah, against one of the 2 worst teams in the NFL. I guess that's what it takes for them to get into the win column.
But as I said, and what tempered, as I said before, what tempered my enthusiasm for Green Bay, even though they'll play them, is maybe Jacksonville. When they won their previous game, as I said, they were somewhat fortunate, even though they had leads in that game. This was a convincing win, and maybe the players can be sold on the idea that, hey, you do have the talent. You showed what you did. Yeah, it's the Patriots, but there's still an NFL teams that lined up 11 against 11.
Yeah, I could see that helping them. So anyway, we have the Monday night game, the Giants at the Steelers. So we only have one practice report so far. No Zach Frazier for the Steelers, so they could be down 3 offensive linemen again. It didn't hurt them Sunday night, but I think it's going to hurt them eventually, especially against this Giants team that could get pressure. This is a classic Mike Tomlin fade situation where Tomlin coming off a win of 2 touchdowns or more, and when favored the next week is 15-27 against the spread in his career. And also whenever the Steelers get a lot of money heading their way, usually want to fade them. So I think the Giants will bounce back. They were embarrassed last week against their biggest rival. I think they'll play much better this week. I don't trust Russell Wilson, especially as the 6.5 point favorite. So I like the Giants quite a bit here. I don't know if they're going to quite make the card, but I will be betting on them. What are your thoughts on this game?
The only concern I have, I don't know if I can play either side in this team. I certainly can't play the Giants. This team is just very dysfunctional. You have to wonder about the morale on the team. And, Cincinnati, they gave up 17 points to Cincinnati, but they really gave up 10 points because of that late touchdown. And Cincinnati have been giving up points to everybody. They gave up 28 points last week in what I talked about earlier. I think I mentioned it at the top of the show with the remark about the fans leaving early and the Giants leaving earlier in that game last week. It was ugly 7 straight punts to start the game for both teams, not just the Giants. 119 total yards in that game. The concern I really can't play the Giants, who've scored more than 21 points just once, and that was in their win at Cleveland, their 21-15 win. They scored 29 against Seattle, but remember, they had that block kick return for a touchdown. Otherwise, it would have another low-scoring game. They've been held to single digits in 3 of their 7 games this year. That's how bad that offense has been. And Brian Daboll, the coach, got the job because of the work he did with Josh Allen in Buffalo as offensive coordinator. So, Daniel Jones bears a lot of the blame, but The blame goes with the offensive line, which has not been able to sustain the improvement that they appeared to show earlier in the year when they still weren't scoring a lot of points, but at least were able to run the ball with a little bit of effectiveness. Pittsburgh, what keeps me away from playing Pittsburgh is this is a team that generally does not score, although to be fair, and of course there was some defensive help here, they scored 32 against Vegas and they scored 37 against the Jets last week, one on the road, one at home. And I'd have to say overall, has the Jets offense and certainly the Raiders offense any better than the offense and the Giants that they'll be seeing this week? And of course, Pittsburgh, 5 of their 7 games, they've allowed 10, 6, 10, 13, and 15 points. So you don't expect them to give up a lot of points, especially at home, especially on a Monday night. I am concerned about Tomlin's record as a home favorite coming off of that win, especially coming off a win as an underdog, which I didn't really think they deserved to be last week against the Jets, but that's a different matter. If I play the game, I might look under the total, and I might use Pittsburgh in a 6-point teaser with 1 or 2 other favorites if I can find them in a range that I like.
Okay, yeah. Stu saying the money line parlay against the 4 bad teams. If you fade the Titans, Raiders, Panthers, and Patriots, you only get plus 121
Yeah.
the money line parlay. So it's not great.
Well, as far as money line parlays go, I'll just point this out in baseball for those who bet on baseball, and sometimes you're faced with some big favorites, and you won't be able to use it in the World Series, but during the season you will, because you talk about going against bad teams. If you play in baseball a pair of minus 200 favorites, okay, so they're minus 200, meaning they've got a 67% chance of winning the game. That's what that translates into. You get a return as if you're playing. Well, similar to this 4-team moneyline parlay, it's similar to getting back plus 125 on a 2-team parlay. Let's do the math is very simple. Let's say you bet $100 to win 50 at minus 2 to 1. Okay, so you now got 150. You bet that to win 75, which is 2 to 1, and you win that. So now you got 225. You take out your original $100 investment. You're left with 125. So you've played 2 substantial favorites in a parlay, and you're getting back as if you had played a single plus 125 underdog. So you're playing 2 teams that were expected to win by decent margins, 2 to 1, and you're getting paid as if you played a team that was expected to lose.
That's funny. That's funny how that works.
Yeah,
people get suckered into it all the time too. So, it's interesting how that works. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, chances are 3 of those teams win. But,
especially this year.
Yeah, and what if the Jets are just truly awful and give up? Like, do you really want to put them in the money line parlay? Like, I'm confident the Chiefs will win. I'm confident the Broncos will win. I'm confident the Lions will win. The Jets, on the other hand.
How about the Ravens?
Yeah, you can put the Ravens in. I do like the Browns. I think the Browns could play their toughest game of the year. I think that is the Cleveland Super Bowl. I think they're going to come out play much harder than Baltimore. So, and I think Baltimore can still win, but still,
By the way, an interesting point for it. I keep track of like 80 different situations during the season. And this is a very simple one. And I'm shocked at the results because they're much more one-sided than you would normally expect, even in a year that has been somewhat volatile. Teams that lost their last game, lost or tied, but there haven't been any ties yet. Okay. Home favorites this year against the spread in their next game are 5-13 against the spread. Home underdogs are 5-15-1 against the spread. There's been one pick'em game in that situation that covered. On the other hand, road favorites after a loss, 14-5 against the spread this year. Now that does include neutral games because when I chart them very often for my point spread situations, I chart both teams as road teams. Okay, because they're playing in a basically like the Philadelphia Green Bay game. So I'm surprised that off a loss, you wouldn't expect home teams off a loss to be performing as poorly as they are so far this year. Now you can take that as one of 2 ways. Maybe there's some sort of fundamental explanation, or as was with the case when favorites kept covering, it's due for a regression, and we're going to see favorites start performing better. And the only problem with that latter thought, well, there are problems with both of them, but the problem with the latter thought is you don't know when that regression will occur. Certainly with the turnaround and the performance of favorites, it was expected, but I don't know, everyone expected it to be as dramatic as it was 2 weeks ago, and then Colin turned around again with favorites performing decently last week. Usually it's spread out over several weeks, but it's an interesting thing to note.
I was about to ask you, do you think there's a reason for that, or do you think it's just randomness?
Well, the strength of the numbers would normally subject us to say mathematically or statistically it's not random, that there's something to it. But when you break it down, it's still the game of football. And again, a lot of it may have to do with the matchups. And I think another thing, and we talked about this off the air because of the newsletter that I did this week with home field advantage. There have also been, we talked about not just the lower margins that we've seen home teams winning overall by, when you take the average wins and losses, what the net positive numbers are, but also the point spread. The average point spread over the last few years is less than 2 when you take them all. Now, of course, there's some underdogs in there, but underdogs have been lower priced. I think this is the first week we've seen as many favorites as we've seen all season of double digits.
Yeah.
I think 4 of them this week.
Yeah, it's definitely a step up. I think I don't think these terrible teams are being priced like correctly.
As bad as they are, you mean?
Yeah, I think the number. I think the lines have to increase, and they have increased this week, but I don't think they've increased enough. We'll see.
Yeah,
they might have to go above 2 touchdowns at some point because these teams, like Carolina, has not been competitive at all. The New England has not been competitive at all, except when they played other horrible teams.
I remember, I want to say it was maybe 25, maybe 30 years ago, one of the teams in your area, Temple, was so bad that they ultimately took the team off the board. But before they took them off the board, they were like 40-point underdogs against major programs, against not quality programs, just other similar level. They called them back 1A, which is now the FBS level. They were that bad, so that it'll never get to that. But I mean, we have seen isolated instances over the years. I think maybe Tampa Bay, their first year in the league when they went 0-14, actually. I think they were 18 to 22 point underdogs in a couple of games. But those days are long gone.
I always love the quote by the head coach in that season.
John McKay, yes. John McKay, I know the one you're going to. Go ahead.
Yeah, he was.
Go ahead and say it.
The reporter asked, what are your
what did you think of your team's execution?
And he said, I'm in favor of it.
Great quote. Still one of my top 5 all-time quotes in any field.
Yeah, it's incredible. So yeah, that's it for our picks. Do you want to talk about your site, thelogicalapproach.com? You mentioned the newsletter, which you forwarded to me. It's outstanding. I urge anyone to sign up for the newsletter. It's great information on there.
Yeah, we have a feature every week. Last week we did home underdogs. Is a myth of the home underdog performance, and if you want it, maybe next week, we can share a little bit about, because it's really is. I don't use the word astounding very often, but the performance of home underdogs is astounding, and not in the way that most people think, which is why it is astounding, because the results are so much different than the perception. And this week I talked about home field advantage, and I think next week I do my mid-season college football update on teams that have improved the most or worsened the most this year. And then I do a statistical thing the following year based upon one of the reports I used to put out every year with take a look in college and pros. What factors lead to good point spread success over the years? In other words, what do teams have to do? Or when it's a retrospective look. In other words, teams that have accomplished this in a game have had this degree of success, which basically leads you to saying, okay, let's look for matchups where that is likely to occur, because it's basically strength against weakness, or weakness against strength, however you look at it. So that the thing that I do update every week, the stats, now that we're halfway through the college season and almost halfway through the pro season, the stats are somewhat more meaningful. I do caution people with the college stats, and I keep 2 separate stats. I publish the ones that have all games in it, but the ones that I rely on are the ones that eliminate those games against the FCS teams, the 1AA teams, as I call them. And they used to be called.
I still call them 1AA, 1A.
Yeah. Well, you still call it Washington, an old name too.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's by accident or delivered, but it's consistent. Nonetheless, the situation was that 20, 30 years ago, I lost my train of thought, so I'll let you get back to that.
I was about to say I called the Redskins. I call the Washington basketball team the Bullets still. So I stick with. I don't
by the way, I would have loved to have seen Washington, and it's a negative connotation because of the performance. But how about the Washington Generals, the foils for the Harlem Globetrotters?
That's good. I think I would have gone with like Hogs or Red Hogs as just
Tribute to the Super Bowl teams.
right, and it's a unique, and you could go from Redskins to Hogs easily because you go Redskins to Pigskins to Pigs to Hogs. Easy transition there, and it would have been unique, much better than Commanders.
And it would have been very well received by the fan base.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, it's great. You could a great logo. You have a great logo. You could have like the fan. You're honoring the fans, and it's so
that's why I've objected. I understand we don't want to call teams Chiefs, Braves, whatever, but those were the way I look at it, and some of the tribes have looked at it. Those are honoring things. They like the fierceness. They like their what do you call it? Their competitiveness, etc. I don't think those names were chosen in demeaning ways. They were chosen because for strength, to strike fear into the opponents, because we play the game hard, we play the game tough. We're warriors, for example. Okay, we go to battle. That's all part of the vernacular of the NFL. A lot of those things. Oh, I remember what I was going to say before. Back in the day, they used to have lines. They didn't have lines on those FBS teams. The East Tennessee States, the Furmans. Most of the statistics that you see published for college football include those, and usually most of the quality teams, even some of the mid-level teams, will annihilate one of those teams. They'll gain 560 yards, maybe 350 rushing. Because you play such a limited number of games, those statistics still maintain themselves as a significant portion of a team's overall database deep into the season. It's not until you start getting into November where a 550-yard performance, when a team is normally averaging 360, starts to lower the overall average to maybe 370, which is a little bit more reasonable based upon the games other than that gimme game where they win 58-3.
Okay. I saw this comment. I got scared for a second. He said, Cassandra says...
Yeah, I saw it also, and I know what you're thinking, yeah.
I know. I was like, wait a second.
You were thinking Jameis Winston.
Yeah. I was like, oh, man. I'm glad I didn't bet that yet, but yeah. Well, sad to hear about James Wiseman, but yeah. Anyway, way bigger.
He's had a tough start to his NBA career.
Yeah. Mike says, I still think the Washington cheerleaders should have gone commando. Nice. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching.
Yes, go commando and cheer on the visiting sideline.
Exactly. Yeah. The Tampa Bay, their cheerleaders used to distract all the opponents all the time.
What's that?
The Tampa Bay Buccaneers cheerleaders.
Was it the cannon? Oh, the cheerleaders. Okay.
The cheerleaders. They were called the swashbucklers, and they would like cheer right in front of the bench, or if they're in the huddle, they used to cheer right in front of the players, and so they try to distract them. They used to do. I don't know if they still do that.
I have to say the league had to pass some sort of rule against that.
Yeah, I imagine so, because they used to do that all the time. So anyway. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching and commenting. Really appreciate it. We're going to be back on Saturday with Tom, our final thoughts on the week 8 picks. Thank you so much, Andy, for joining us. Always
a pleasure.
With you. Yeah, it's great. I love doing the show with you every week. So check out thelogicalapproach.com. The link is in the description. Last question. So do you like the Dodgers or Yankees?
I do like the Yankees for a number of reasons. First of all, the best pitcher on either team is Garrett Cole, who may get 3 starts. We're not quite sure, but I would imagine that he will be going game 1 against Flaherty, who's really struggled in his about, I think, 5 of his last 6 starts have really struggled. But I also like the way the Dodgers, the Yankees, I understand that they are considering using Nestor Cortez, who had been mostly a pretty decent starter. A couple appearances out of the bullpen when he struggled later in the year, but then he sort of regained his form. But my understanding is that they're looking to use him in relief of a couple of the other starters, Luis Gil, and I forget who the other one was, so that those 2 starters will not have to face the Dodgers a third time. In other words, in their starts, they will go face 18 batters, and then Cortez will come in and go, 2, 3, 4 innings, whatever he can do. He can go the full rest of the game if he's effective, especially being a lefty and going up against some of the left-handers in the Dodgers lineup. Don't know about Freeman, how healthy he is. He's had a decent amount of rest. He sat out, I think, a couple of games in the postseason so far. I do like the over in this series. The teams combined for, I think, 27 runs in their 3-game series. in June back at Yankee Stadium. The first game of which went 11 innings, and I think the Dodgers won 2-1. The other two games were clearly much higher scoring. So as long as the total is under 9, I'll be looking to play the over on a game-by-game basis. I'm likely to play the Yankees in Game 1. They are short underdogs. I think the Dodgers, with Flaherty, are about minus 120. I want to check the price on the Yankees to win the series. I would expect the series to go at least 6 games, which means that the Yankees, if they don't win it in 5, which would mean a 4-1, not quite sweep, they'd have to win the series in LA. But I think if they're able to have that kind of success, this has been a very mediocre playoff field. It's for the first time that I can remember in a number of years where we did not have a single regular season where team win 100 games in the regular season. The Dodgers came close with 98, leading the National League. Yankees 94. We do have the number 1, and I believe it's the number 3 offenses in baseball as far as runs scored. Surprisingly, I think the Yankees were number 1. I think Arizona was number 2, and the Dodgers were number 3. So both teams have a lot of offense, a lot of depth. I do like what I've seen out of the Yankees bullpen. I like Weaver, the young kid who's become a closer for them in the final weeks, which had been an issue for the Yankees. So I think overall, at a nice plus price, I'll be looking for the Yankees to win. The dilemma I will face is if the Yankees lose Game 1 and I end up losing the play, how big of an underdog will I need them to be to still win the series down 1-0?
Yeah, I look at the FanDuel. Yankees are plus 104. Dodgers are minus 122 for the series.
That's a little short, but do I want to take a chance on? Because I would imagine if the series goes to New York tied 1-1, the series price at that point might be close to pick 'em.
Okay. Yeah, I know nothing about this, so thank you for your analysis there. So, guys, once again, thank you so much. Please hit like, subscribe, comment below, share this video. Visit the link in the description of the merch store. All that would be appreciated. And I will talk to you on Saturday. Have a great start to your weekend, and I'll talk to you later.